Hello, and welcome to the League of Canadian Poets 2021 Feminist Caucus in Conversation series. My name is Aisha Chatterjee, and I'm chair of the Feminist Caucus. This year, we're delighted to have as host Renée Sarojini Saklikar. Renée is a poet and lawyer who lives in Vancouver on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish people. Her collection, Children of Air India, won the Canadian Authors Association Poetry Prize, and she's also co-author of the poetry and essay collection, Listening to the Bees, which won the Independent Publisher Book Awards Gold Medal in 2019 in the Ecology Environment category. In each of this year's 3 podcasts, Renée invites a pair of Canadian poets to sit down with her and talk about what she aptly calls compassionate feminism. The Feminist Caucus is very proud to provide space to these strong voices from across the country and for these conversations.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's Renée Sarojini Saklikar, and I am back with this afternoon's podcast for the Feminist Caucus of the League of Canadian Poets. Welcome to all in these unsettled and challenging times where we're dealing with justice issues, a climate emergency, and pandemics, both the opioid crisis and also, of course, COVID. So I am here wanting to acknowledge that I am so grateful to be doing these interviews from my home in East Van, which is on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam nations. And with me are two fine poets, Tara Borin and Molly Cross-Blanchard. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Renee.
Hi.
Aw, good to hear your voices. In the background is Leslie Fletcher, the amazing Leslie Fletcher, who was our sound tech and has helped me curate, along with Aisha Chatterjee, the president of the Feminist Caucus, whom you'll be hearing as well in this recording. So our topic today is compassionate feminism, and I'm going to begin by reading the bios of our two selected poets today. They're remarkable people who are doing important and interesting work on all kinds of levels that I think touch on this overall theme we're exploring today on compassionate feminism. So I'll start with their bios, and then I'm going to turn to each poet and ask them to read some poems in response to a quote I'm going to read by Bell Hooks. So I'll begin with Tara Borin is a queer, non-binary poet and writer living in the traditional territory of the Trondek-Wichin, Dawson City, Yukon. Tara's debut full-length poetry collection, The Pit, was published by Nightwood Editions in March 2021. Their poetry has been anthologized in Resistance, Righteous Rage in the Age of the Me Too Movement, University of Regina Press, and Best New Poets in Canada 2018 with Quattro Books, as well as published in various literary journals, both online and in print. We are so honored to have you here today. And our second or accompanying poet is Molly Cross-Blanchard. She's a white and Métis poet, writer, and editor born on Treaty 3, Fort Frances, Ontario, raised on Treaty 6, Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and currently living on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples, aka Vancouver, where she works as the publisher of Room magazine. We're so delighted to have you. Molly has a BA in English from the University of Winnipeg and an MFA in creative writing from the University of British Columbia. Her poems and work appear widely in literary journals and magazines, and her chapbook, I Don't Want to Tell You, was published by Rahila's Ghost Press, Fine Press, in 2018, and her debut full-length book of poetry is Exhibitionist with Coach House Books 2021. Welcome, Molly.
Thank you.
So here is the quote I'm going to lay down for us today on this exploration of compassionate feminism. It's from Bell Hooks. For me, Forgiveness and compassion are always linked. How do we hold people accountable for wrongdoing, and yet at the same time remain in touch with their humanity enough to believe in their capacity to be transformed? How do we hold people accountable and yet at the same time remain in touch with their humanity enough to believe in their capacity to be transformed? I wonder if that's too idealistic. I'm not sure. Uh, Tara, do you want to maybe respond and maybe read a poem or two?
Yeah, I love that quote, and I think it goes well with the poem that I've chosen to read. So maybe I'll just go right to that.
Wonderful.
So this poem was inspired by a tweet that I saw some time ago from Twitter user Stop Tweeting Mia, and the tweet was, "Queers need a new word for your ex, who's also your best friend and roommate." And the poem is called "Chosen Family." What's the word for your ex-girlfriend who is also your best friend and roommate? Makes endless peanut butter toasts for your kid, draws them a bath on Sundays, and lets them crawl into bed beside her when they have a nightmare. Comes with you to the grocery store and reminds you to buy the things that you like to eat. You remind each other to take your meds in the morning, then plan the day over coffee, who has therapy and who doesn't. You dress the same, band tees under plaid flannel button-downs, jean jackets and tight fades, DMing each other animal videos from separate beds late at night. Who you've known longer than anyone, whose heart you once broke and now cradle as if it were your own. Thank you.
Oh,
Oh,
exquisite,
Thank
really.
you.
And I think it's so on point. It starts to give us a nuanced look at relation, at living. Wow, I loved it. And
Thank you.
you're so welcome. Yeah, this idea of how we experience our reality and the way we reach out to each other, I think is also encompassed in this quote. Can we remain compassionate at the same time as we hold people accountable? Molly, what say you?
well, the first of all, Tara, that was beautiful. I love that poem.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
sharing it. Um, yeah, so the poem that I chose because we were kind of couching this conversation in the context of tough times.
Mhm.
And I wrote a lot of. I was surprised actually by the number of poems that ended up in my book about depression and anxiety. And the poem that I chose today was one that I wrote near the beginning of the pandemic when I was feeling pretty insecure about my creative output and my place in the industry. Um, so it's called Nothing Lazy Can Be Good. Nothing lazy can be good, and my mind is so lazy. If you put a puzzle in my lap, I'll wait for the chapels of the world to reconstruct themselves. I get a small headache and shrug off any poem thought like, ew, poetry. I tell myself I can write the great one whenever I feel like it, but I never feel like it. I'm not smart enough for the landscape of my life, these grand libraries and desktop computers. Why do you trust me with matters of insurance? I show you with my face that I'm stupid, and you still give me enough money to feed myself. My taste in music is like whatever Abby's vibing to on Spotify. The last book I read was one Cara placed in my hands. I don't know if my pants are cool until Jasmine tells me my pants are cool. I submit a first draft, and they take it, sure, but I wonder if I should tell them, hey, this is not a very good poem. My mind was lazy when I wrote it because I decided not to drink another coffee, because I might not have been able to sleep, because I guess I need a lot of sleep these days. But I still want to be called a poet, so yeah, Honored to have it in your magazine. Can't wait to see it in print. And that's the poem.
My goodness, laying down a lot. It's brilliant, and it just captures everything about those early days. Thank you. Tara, I wondered if you had any responses to that.
Well, it was very relatable, Molly, I have to say. Yeah, and it brings up for me thoughts of self-compassion too, and allowing ourselves to rest in those more fallow times. And Molly, I love how you bring in different friends that are, supporting you and holding you up even through the hard times.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tara. I was penciling in this need for self-compassion. It's a very tender poem that also kind of indicts a whole bunch of expectations. And this crisscross between tenderness and indictment has come up as a bit of a pattern, a theme, a leitmotif in the conversations we're having about compassion. And I want to circle back to what Tara, I think, very perceptively said, and wonder, Molly, like, did you feel in the writing of this poem that it could also be an act of self-compassion?
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about putting language to your insecurities and how that kind of deflates the ugly feeling or takes some of its power away, and almost helps to diminish the shame that you feel when maybe you're not producing as much as your writer friends around you, or you feel like your work is not to the caliber that it maybe used to be, or that you feel you are capable of. So I think in that moment, I was trying to write new poems for the book because we needed to fill some pages, and everything I tried to write was just really bad in my personal opinion. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel worthy of being able to go into the book. And so I just decided to kind of lay my cards on the table and talk about how I was feeling, and that I was feeling essentially just not good enough to be a poet, or not good enough to publish a book. So yeah, I think in sort of talking about the negative feelings that I was having about my writing, it actually ended up being an act of compassion or an act of forgiveness to myself.
Yeah, I felt that. I felt absolved.
Good.
Good. And Tara, I thought that might be a good segue to ask you, do you have some practices that you actually were doing in the before times or when the pandemic hit? Do you have some self-care for persons who happen to be writing poetry that you would care to share with us this afternoon?
Yeah, I'm the first to admit that I'm not great at self-care. It's
Ah,
sometimes really hard for me to extend that
yes,
compassion to myself. I'm,
yes.
very quick to extend it to others and to give folks sort of, lots of grace. But
Mhm,
it's hard to turn that inward.
mhm.
Um,
It
yeah,
is.
I think for me, it's a lot of trying to replace negative self-talk with something more positive,
Mhm,
to catch myself in the moment that it's happening, and remind myself to be kind
mhm,
to myself, and
mhm.
maybe talk to myself as I would to a dear friend or to one of my kids. Yeah, I think that's a big one for me. And then also just allowing, sort of what I was saying earlier in response to Molly's poem, just allowing that rest period. Maybe this is a time where the creative work is happening under the surface and where rest is needed,
Mhm, mhm.
and just trusting in the process and knowing that the words are going to come back.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I'm almost moved to tears. Tell us a bit about being a poet with children, living in the North, writing your book, The Pit. Can you just talk a little bit about that to situate our listeners?
Sure, yeah. So Yeah, I mean, I started writing poetry when I was in my teens, and then after I had kids, I really lost all sense of self. Was
Mhm.
just I had three kids, fairly close together, and on top of that, you know, living in the north at the time, I was living off grid, which is really big. It's a lot of work to live off grid.
It
And
is. I
so, yeah.
know.
And so, yeah, I was sort of just lost in all of those responsibilities. And it was after my youngest was born that I realized the thing that I needed to come back to myself was writing. And so that's when I picked it up again and really made a point to make space for it in my life.
Yes.
Um, and then it was out of that return to writing that my first collection, which was it was a chapbook, which was in the Best New Poets 2018 collection, and then after that, the Pit were born out of that time.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm.
so for me, making that space to write was a huge piece of coming back to myself.
Oh, that's tremendous. And both of you releasing books in 2021. Full props, no easy feat. Talk about having to readjust and think about self-care and compassion for each other and all the people you're working with. Tell us, before I switch to Molly and ask her some of these questions, tell us a bit more about your book, The Pit.
Yeah, so the Pit is a collection of poems that are set in a local watering hole here in Dawson City, officially called the Westminster Hotel, but everyone calls it the Pit. It's the longest it's the longest running bar and hotel in the territory, and it's a dive. It's a dive bar. And I worked there for many years and drank there for many years, and it's just such an interesting community, the community that is formed there, and the way
Mhm,
folks are there for each other. And so
mhm.
the poems explore that community and those characters, as well as issues around addiction and my own experiences, having folks very close to me struggling with addictions. So yeah, that's the Pit.
Wow. Molly, tell us, thank you. And Molly, feel free to respond and also to tell us a bit about what it was like bringing a book out in 2021, and tell us just a bit about The Exhibitionist. I think your poems, both of you, your poems give us a flavor, but please
Mm.
share a bit if you will.
Well, first I'll just say that I love The Pit. I love Tara's book. And I've said this before, but I think what I appreciate so much about it is how cohesive it is, and how um, I just really admire that when a poet is able to really take their collection in one direction, and it comes together as this cohesive picture.
Mhm.
And The Pit does that so beautifully. So I'm really happy that we get to be on in this conversation together.
Oh, thank you so much, Molly.
Um, so Exhibitionist is my master's thesis, and these
Mhm.
poems were sort of in the making for about 4 years. I started seriously writing poetry near the end of my undergraduate degree in Winnipeg,
Mhm.
and I, I think there are one or two poems that I wrote back then that ended up in the book. Um, but primarily, I wrote all of the poems at UBC with my thesis advisor, Ian Williams, and my second reader, Sharita Warner. And then also I had Amber Dawn as a poetry teacher who was incredible and very supportive of my poetry.
Mhm.
And it's primarily about shame.
Mm.
It's
Mm.
about the things um, that are embarrassing. A lot
Mhm.
about having a body and just like bodily
Mm.
things that are embarrassing, body hair,
Mm.
fatness,
Mm.
and the way our bodies are perceived.
Mhm. Mhm.
And also about a lot about sex. And I didn't realize that it was a really sort of raunchy book until other people started reading it, and all of a sudden, like I was the sex poet, and that was not. not something that I expected or really thought about, but I guess
Yeah.
it's a lot about sex, and there is like a mostly naked woman on the front of the book.
Yes, they're both books have gorgeous covers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very interested when we're talking about feminism, and as we were saying before the recording in our e-conversations, being sensitive to inclusion about what feminism is and welcoming to people who are writing poetry from perspectives of queerness, of non-binary, and so on. I think this idea of shame and the body very much resonates right now, and in the pandemic as well. Our whole relationship to our bodies as viewed through these machines often. Tara, did you have any comments for Molly on that? Because there's so many things, so many places we could go with this idea of a compassionate feminism that nevertheless challenges things. Because I know you've been involved with Me Too activism, and Molly with your work with Room and through your exploration of sexuality and shame. Tara, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts for Molly on that.
Yeah, I think, Molly, there is a lot of power in your book. Like, that was one of the takeaways for me from it, just in talking about those experiences and naming them, and recognizing, your readers, I'm sure, are recognizing their own experiences in these poems. And I think it gives us, permission to be in our bodies, which are sometimes gross and uncomfortable, and it gives us permission to be sexual. And just, yeah, there's so much power in just putting that out there and naming those things, naming those feelings. And I think your book does that really well.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah, very generous. I'm struck as I'm listening to both of you, as I'm sort of circling now towards another of the questions I had for you both, is how both of you are generous to each other and to each other's work. And one of the things we're asking folks who are listening in to explore in their own practice, in their own lives, is how can we as feminists support each other and what sustains us as community. Molly, can you talk a bit about the community you've either had to seek out, or that maybe when your work with Room, you're actively trying to build? This idea of feminism and community is of interest, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel very lucky to have a pretty extensive community of writers and poets. I think primarily because of being part of the MFA at UBC. I think people have a lot of rightfully have a lot of concerns about MFA programs, the toxic workshop environment and the institutional
Mhm.
bullshit. But I mean,
Mhm.
if there's one thing that an MFA is really good for, it's building your community. And
Mhm.
Tara, I think you did the SFU Writer Studio as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. And was, the same takeaway for me was the community that I made there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've kept a lot of those friendships, and they're all really good about staying in touch and staying in contact and checking in. Um, I think, unfortunately, a commonality with a lot of writers is issues with depression and anxiety. I think we recognize that a lot in each other, and are able to talk pretty openly about use of medication and experiences in therapy, and it just helps with the stigma around mental health crises. And again, it just like deflates the mystery and the seriousness that I've maybe built up around my own mental health, and just helps me break it down a little bit more,
Mhm.
and in a way that I don't think that non-writers understand quite as well, because there are very particular anxieties that come with publishing, and especially publishing something that's very personal. And also this, the whole, you mentioned the pandemic earlier and what it's been like publishing a book during a
Mhm.
pandemic.
Mhm.
So I know my one friend, Selena Bowen, who also published a book at the same time as Tara and I, was very helpful because we were going through that at the same time. And we had planned, a cross country book tour. We're going to go on a road trip and hit all the major cities. And then that dream was dashed, and we were kind of able to go through that grief together, because it is grief. It's a big loss. You work kind of working up to that point where you get to share your work with people and talk about something that you've created with them, and then all of a sudden it's just kind of canceled, and then it's so anticlimactic, and then you just have to start writing the next book. And so she and I were supports for each other in that way, I think.
How wonderful. Tara, did you have a community of support? Was it through the writer's studio, or is it through your own family? Talk to us a bit about your community of support.
Yeah. So as a writer specifically and a poet, definitely the friendships that I made through the writer's studio have endured, and we stay in touch, and send work back and forth sometimes. And but beyond that, I mean, Dawson City is pretty remote. And so for me, Twitter has been a really big way for me to connect with a larger writing community. There is an active community here in the Yukon, but we're all sort of spread out, and so I have found the internet and the move towards virtual events during the pandemic actually worked out well for me. I feel like it brought up some opportunities that wouldn't have maybe been as reachable otherwise, just because it takes me like 2 days just to get out of the territory.
Right.
Because it's 500 kilometers between here and the capital city in Whitehorse. Wow. And so so my online community that I've made was really supportive, and I felt held by them during the whole experience. So
what a gift, because online communities, especially in the pandemic, I've been learning and witnessing, can also be very toxic. And I'm going to circle to that in a moment. But I wanted to pick up something that Molly said that really struck me. And Molly, it was that, the grief that one can feel when you are a creative, and especially a writer, and we are prone to those kind of particular to writer anxieties, and we're so porous and we absorb so much. And the generative act of bringing out a book, I have to keep reminding myself, I brought out this huge book in 2021, huge in the sense it's really long. And I've been thinking, did I do this in 2021 too? I guess I did. And this idea of how normally, that is a big deal for anybody in any type of book. And you do this kind of celebration. And Molly, I thought you evoked that so beautifully about, you had this whole tour plan, the two of you and Selena, and then you had to cancel it, and the grief that must be there. So I thought that was very powerful that you highlighted that for us. And I want to circle now to this idea of these communities as feminists, and given the work that both of you do in your own communities and how you're identifying and bringing those communities to the forefront, as it were, how do you react when things go toxic on social media as feminists? Is there a role for compassion? We do need to sometimes call out injustice. I think we feel as feminists quite passionate about that. But how do we do that so it's not toxic? Molly, any thoughts?
Well, I find my first course of action is always to retreat to the group chat. And that sort of just mitigates the really strong feelings I have right off the hop. I just go to the group chat to my, group of 5 or 6 friends who I know are, they're my safe space, and they'll just let me have my feelings.
Yes.
And I find that's a good way to diffuse the anger and to not be reactive. But I find anyways that most of the folks that I'm interacting with on the daily enact a very feminist, they have a very feminist approach to conflict resolution. And this idea around cancel culture, I've never seen someone that I would consider a friend come out with, reactively and just say, okay, this person's canceled, we're not talking to them anymore. there's always, even if it's public, even if it's on Twitter, there's always the notion that this idea of asking for engagement, asking for conversation. And I find a lot of the time the person who has, brought the toxicity to the table usually will just not respond because for whatever reason. I mean, I won't pretend to, know what's going on in their heads. But I think I'm very privileged to be in a community where I don't come up against that a lot. And, maybe also because I'm just quick to hit the unfollow button if something is rubbing me the wrong way. I just don't want to, I just don't need it on my radar.
But such a good practice. I'm writing it down. It's okay to hit the unfollow. Good.
Even with family, you don't have to be Facebook friends.
Right. Very practical, very wise. And I like what you're saying, that there's an openness to ask for engagement, and that you're so smart about, I think sometimes the most toxic of folks, they just seem to simmer in their own toxicity, and we don't have to figure it out, do we? We don't have to do that labor. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, helpful. Tara, responses, thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's really wise, Molly, the group chat and unfollowing. It is possible to curate your online experience so that it is a safer place, and, and that it's folks that you trust and sort of have similar values. And, sometimes the more upsetting things make their way onto the timeline. And I think, outside of what Molly has said for dealing with that, it doesn't always work out to try and engage with folks like that. I find, especially in online spaces, people are not necessarily engaging in good faith, and I've learned my lesson the hard way, that it's better just to not engage with those folks, because it just leads to more harm and frustration for yourself.
And takes us back to self-care. There's so much we can't change. I find it quite inspiring listening to both of you, that it's okay to draw boundaries. It's okay to talk about certain things, but how we do so that we're looking after ourselves. Tara, talk a bit, if you would, about how are you feeling as a poet right now with your practice, your children, where you're at, when you're thinking about the coming year? We're now in December. Any special projects that you want to share, or thoughts that you want to share?
Yeah, I've actually been away from poetry. The last few months I've been focusing on a novel. And I've just finished sort of a very rough first draft, which is really exciting for me. But I've been missing poetry. Really, I've been thinking about poetry a lot, and how much I miss that form. And so in the coming months, I would like to come back to that and start writing more poetry again.
Congratulations on a first draft. This is big, finishing those drafts is a big deal, I think.
It
Even
is.
first. Yeah, good.
Yeah,
Good.
thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome.
And I had talking about, community and things like that. I had great support, an accountability buddy, and we would check in every day, and we were both really encouraging to one another. So, and I found that really helpful, having that accountability piece for my daily writing practice. And so that's something I think both of us, my friend and I, are going to continue with. Just knowing that there's someone waiting for your email on the other end to, hear if you wrote today and how it went.
That's just, again, makes me teary. I think that's lovely. It's practical and helpful and interesting. Tell me more about you and your accountability buddy. Like, are they in anywhere near to you, or are you far apart, or can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so it's Megan Cole. She's in BC.
Yay!
And so and so we met online. I can't remember the context, but just mutuals on Twitter, and she was about to begin revising a second draft of something, and I wanted to work on this first draft. We had a similar timeline. And so we decided that we would write Monday to Friday, and we would do a quick email check-in every day. And then on Friday afternoons, we do a longer Zoom check-in where we just chat about our week and our writing and how things are going. And it's been great, like our friendship has really grown out of this. And we've extended, talking about self-care and that sort of thing, just so much care to one another on the hard days. And, on days where the words aren't coming, there's still a lot of like, it's okay, take a rest day and come back to it tomorrow. So it's been amazing for me having someone like that.
Oh, that's just inspiring and lovely. And I know Megan, and I'm thinking how what you have just explained, elucidated, is really the embodiment of what we hope feminism brings to women, because it can be so isolating in this country, in this moment. And I wonder, Molly, did you have any responses to that? And I'll sort of turn those questions of sort of looking forward. What are you working on? How's it going? What are your feels right now? Yeah, like that.
Sure. Tara, your friendship with Megan gives me so much hope that someday I too will make some new friends.
Aw, you can join our accountability group.
Oh, I don't know about that because I don't have much to be accountable for right now. I've really taken a massive break from writing. And when I say massive, I mean I haven't written anything new really for almost a year now, which is a difficult pill to swallow because I've been, doing a lot of promo stuff with the book and doing festivals and stuff, and feeling like a bit of a fraud. Like, oh, everyone thinks I'm a writer, but actually I'm not doing any writing. And I think it's, the pandemic has been, a very creative place for a lot of people, and it has been the absolute opposite for me. I feel like it's been like creatively crushing. Yeah, it's not good. And, I have these moments of, okay, well, maybe I just am not going to be a writer anymore. Maybe I'm just done. And I'm trying to not fall into that, sort of putting that on myself, because I genuinely think that this is a moment and I need to get past it, because I do love writing. I've always, since I was a kid, I knew I was gonna write books. So I applied for a Canada Council grant, and
Good for you.
I'll find out in February if that was
Fingers
successful.
crossed. Fingers crossed.
Thank you. So if it is, then I'm going to take a few months off, and I'm going to just sit down and try and do that thing that other writers do where they just write a little bit every day. That's never been my practice. I'm a very lazy writer. I just kind of write when I feel like it and when it comes to me. But I might just need to mix up that practice a little bit to get back at it, because there's a lot of pressure I feel on debut authors to like get the next book out so that you can stay relevant or whatever. So I'm trying to let go of that a little bit, but also trying not to let myself just fall away from writing because I'm sad right now.
Oh, a big, huge air hug across the miles from you. I am so moved and in awe of your bravery. That is the word that circles in my mind right now, your courage to share. I'm guessing there will be many listening to this who will be going, oh, thank you for articulating this. So almost certainly I feel in my bones you'll be back, but how brave and necessary to take those breaks, because the subconscious knows what it needs. And to me, this is the ultimate in self-care. I wonder if Tara has any thoughts on this.
Yeah, Molly, I would just poet to poet, like have absolutely been there. From when I finished the manuscript for the pit, I mean, really, I wrote maybe a couple little poems. I'm also a pretty lazy writer. I really relate to that. Even though I try to have a daily practice, and actually this last 3 months working on this novel is the first time that I've had a daily practice like that. Yeah. And I would just say that it is, just you have to listen to your body if it needs rest, and I know that you'll be writing again, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of pressure, like you said, on debut authors and on writers in general, just to be producing all the time, and and like you said, staying relevant, and I haven't published much in literary magazines this year, but just trying to trust that that the work will come when it's ready.
So beautifully said, trying to trust and open to trust. And juxtaposed to that, this feeling that I wonder in the pandemic if it has become increased because of the lack of physical interaction. So everything online, and there's that frenetic quality to production, which is such a colonial capitalist means, and also that frenetic social media buzz. And it can be addictive. I'm on there too, you see me, but it can also be relevant to whom, right? And relevant to what? And I'm slowly beginning to think of the things I don't want to be relevant to. I think Molly has a wonderful thing on her website. I saw, TikTok, it's like, I don't want to be relevant there. And if that means a certain price has to be paid, well, so be it. As listeners, and as you may know, I'm a long poem writer. And so I'm eagerly listening to this conversation that you're both having with me, that as a long poem writer, I feel sometimes I genuinely live in a different sphere, a different planet even. And as I write at my epic fantasy in verse, yeah, not of this world. So it's wonderful to hear these voices articulating both the pain and what I say in my compassion mantra, what hurts and also what can help. And both of you have given us a lot of helpful, practical things that can guide us and maybe nurture us a little. And I guess that really brings me to a question I'm eager to ask both of you. I'll start with Molly. Are there women, are people, persons in your life that you really hold up as a kind of in a mentor model? Are there persons in your life that serve as mentors? Do we as feminists need to be mentors? Do we need mentors? I'm interested in this topic. I wondered if you had thoughts.
That's a really interesting question. I think I would have had um, a more straightforward answer when I was in school.
Mhm.
But now, being out of school, being at Room as the publisher, it feels almost like I've entered a space where I'm now a mentor.
Indeed.
Um,
And that's why I asked the question. I was thinking of the room mentorship program. So yes, yes.
but the people, my writing community, my friends who I went through the program with,
Mhm.
feel like mentors to me as well.
Mm-hmm.
Just because of the way we're always in communication about all things related to publishing, sharing our experiences. It feels like we've got this um, collective understanding that we're there to help each other. And I think that can be considered mentoring as well, even though we're maybe all at the same place in our careers. There's still a lot that we have to learn from each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well said. Tara, responses, thoughts, and your own thoughts on mentor being one or seeking one?
Yeah, I love Molly. I love that idea of sort of a collective mentorship. I think that's really great. Um, yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of mentors over the years, having very little experience with formal teaching. Like, I did the writer's studio, but I have never done, an MFA or anything like that. And so for me, mentorship has come in a lot of different forms, just from folks that I meet in the community. There's a writer's residency here in Dawson City called it's the Burton House Residency, run by the Writers Trust.
Yes.
And the writers who have come there through there have been really wonderful. Anna Schofield, Sarah Meehan, Elizabeth Ruth, Trish Sella are all writers that I got to know while they were here. And they've always been so generous with their time and their expertise. And I can still, pose questions now. Shalane Knight is another one, just online. Like, I just learned so much from following her and the tips that she so generously shares through social media. So yeah, I think for me, mentorship is just like this always changing, shifting thing that I pull from a lot of different places in the writing community.
So rich to hear you both. And I'm looking at the time, and once again, I can't believe it. I'll turn to Leslie. I think we're almost at the end of our time. I want to thank you on behalf of the League, myself. I'm Renée Sarojini Saklikar, long poem writer interested in this topic of feminism and compassionate feminism. We've been speaking today with Tara Borin and Molly Cross-Blanchard on our feminist podcast series. Thank you both so much for taking time to speak with me. I really appreciate it a lot.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so
Renee.
much. Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah, this was a really lovely conversation.
Yeah, it was great to talk with you both.
Ditto. I eagerly look forward to staying in touch and to following your next steps. And I want to thank you for your honesty and for just putting it out there. I really feel it's going to touch a lot of persons who will be hopefully tuning in. And I think that's a wrap for those of you listening and enjoying our Feminist Caucus podcast. Please consider checking out the League. There's been lots of changes, lots of exciting things happening in the League of Canadian Poets, and you can find us on the interwebs. We appreciate your support and interest. Until then, and until next time, be safe, take care, all best. Signing off, Renée Sarojini Saklikar.